This is a video I've been wanting to do since I started True Tan Wrestling back up, which was about halfway through the NCAA season. But with the Olympic trials, the nonstop news dump during the NCAA season, and my own mind, it kind of took a second to get done. But I'll let you all know now, the research, planning, and creation of this video was not only fun, but if you are sitting here today, you're clearly watching it, so it's clearly done as well. Today we are jumping into the True Tan time machine to give a history lesson that started 10 years ago with the 2014 NCAA recruiting class rankings. I'll be using the Flow article / rankings done about 10 years ago and seeing how the top wrestlers from the 2014 high school class all panned out. Now some pre-info before we get started. To be honest, I'm not a huge fan of bust videos. Honestly, if you try college wrestling, especially D1 college wrestling for a year, mad props to you. It's just sometimes the cards of life have different ideas for every individual. So for certain top tier individuals that didn't do as well as expected, I might list them here, but I for sure won't trash them. The wrestlers that exceeded expectations or well panned out will for sure get mentioned here as well too. Also, to be fair, I can't talk about all 100 wrestlers or else we'll be here for hours. This video is more to talk about the super interesting developments that have been happening for her the past 10 years. Now with all that out of the way, I hope you enjoyed this history lesson, and if you do, be sure to like and subscribe along with leaving a comment in the comment section below. Now let's honor the high school wrestlers from the 2014 wrestling class 10 years later. Again, this is all based on Flow's rankings from about 10 years ago. So here's a few of the top ranked teams that I put in a spreadsheet. Also, just so everyone knows, the number associated with each wrestler is based on their weight class ranking and not pound for pound. Nowadays, they usually just do pound for pound to do these class rankings, but back then they did the ranking for the individual weight classes, which is a big key difference to note. To probably absolutely no one's surprise, the top team back in 2014 for recruiting was Penn State. Yeah, who would have guessed that one? This 2014 class was coming into a competitive NCAA team race. Minnesota, Oklahoma State, and Penn State just got done duking it out during the 2014 national championships. And there was a lot of seniors heading out as well. So it was almost a perfect time for some of the top schools to reload. Penn State brought in some legends like Jason Nolf, Nick Nevels, Bo Nickel, and Shakur Rashid. Nolf and Nevels were the only two wrestlers ranked number 1 at their weight class. I would say Jason Nolf definitely lived up to expectations as well with that, being a 4-time NCAA finalist and 3-time national champ, dominating some of his brackets. Nolf now competes on the freestyle scene for the senior level at 74 kilograms, pretty consistently being the number 2 guy behind Kyle Dake. I also believe he just announced he's going to have a fight coming up here soon, so who knows if he's done with freestyle wrestling or if he's fully committing to fighting now. Nevels did very well, but he never reached the finals like you would expect for a number 1 ranked wrestler. He was a 2-time All-American and helped the Nittany Lions out a lot at heavyweight. He actually didn't start his senior year due to a huge shakeup in the 2014 class rankings by a familiar named guy, Anthony Cassar. Cassar was a New Jersey state champion in 2014 and probably on paper was the worst guy coming into Penn State for that class. However, after a lot of adversity, he would bump up to heavyweight and win a national title, totally shattering expectations. Lately, Cassar's just been training, and it looks like he is going to stick with fighting for the foreseeable future. Bo Nickel, in a way, also outperformed, being ranked 2nd in his weight class, but was also a 4-time national finalist and a 3-time national champion, looking crazier and crazier as his college years went on. Now he is currently climbing the ranks in the UFC. Shakur Rashid was actually ranked 7th leaving high school, and his only All-American honor was indeed 7th place, along with a lot of other national qualifier honors. But he was also plagued with injuries, so that didn't help as well. The only other big name in this class was 16th ranked Gary Deanmore, who eventually transferred to Rider for the rest of his career. And ultimately, Penn State brings in some great recruits, but they're also a great example of developing your athletes. You could bring in a great class, but you also need to be successful in the classroom and life to continue with growth. For example, the 3rd ranked team in the best recruiting classes on paper paper in 2014 might surprise some people, but it was Northwestern. And man, did they have a class coming in despite what actually happened. Bryce Brill was one of Northwestern's top recruits. He was #1 ranked wrestler in his weight class, but he never really did much in college. And from what I found in my research, it was mostly injury related, which is pretty unfortunate because he had a lot of talent in high school. Johnny Sebastian was also another #1 ranked wrestler, but the best he did was the round of 16, and then he transferred to Wisconsin during his final season. Finally, there was also Stefan Micic, who I think we all know had an amazing college career, and he is a current world champion. Having my hindsight glasses on, I really feel bad for Northwestern with this class, especially because of Stefan Micic. He's basically a world-renowned household name in the sport of wrestling, and he only spent one redshirt year at Northwestern before leaving to go to Michigan. It's kind of crazy to think the talent they brought in for this class and nothing really ever happened from it. To wrap up the top 3, we have The Ohio State, who brought in some pretty impactful wrestlers that helped them win a national title the very next year. For starters, they had 3 wrestlers come in, and almost all of them were pretty impactful during their time there. They had Kyle Snyder, who I think we all know is in the conversation for Mr. America these days, being an Olympic champ, world champ, and 3-time national champion. They also added Micah Jordan to the long line of Jordans in college wrestling, and he was a 3-time All-American and 1-time finalist during his last season. The final big name, especially for PA homers, is Thomas Haynes, who was unbelievable in high school in the great state of Pennsylvania, but once he couldn't crack the lineup at Ohio State due to a certain someone bumping up, he would transfer to Lock Haven, and the best he ever did for them was make the round of 16 a couple times. However, he was a long-time starter at heavyweight while Lock Haven was starting to rebuild. Oklahoma State honestly had a huge mixed bag of a class, not because they were all over the place in the rankings and did all over the place during their college career, but they actually had a massive class coming in. At the top of the list was their #1 ranked wrestler Chance Marsteller, who was for sure battling some demons back then, which is pretty tough to do when you're at one of the best programs that I'm sure has one of the best systems in the country. He would have about 1 season at Oklahoma State before transferring to Lock Haven. He was a couple-time All-American for Lock Haven, so it all sort of worked out. However, he would really peak into his freestyle career, making a few national teams and even the world team in 2023, being possibly the GOAT in the sport, Jordan Burroughs. To this day, he's announced that he's going to continue wrestling at 86 kilograms to make a couple world teams and maybe the Olympic team in the next cycle. However, none of that is to really thank Oklahoma State though. Marsteller wasn't the only guy to transfer out of this class though. They had a few others like Ryan Blees, who went to Virginia Tech, and Gary Wayne Harding, who went to North Carolina. They're both top 10 in their weight classes, and they both made the national tournament for their other teams a few times. Then to really dive deep into this mixed bag, let's talk about some actual Oklahoma State staples. Chandler Rogers was one of Oklahoma State's big recruits, All-American twice for them at 8th and 5th, which is pretty good for being ranked 5th in your weight class. He didn't even start his final year though at Oklahoma State, losing to JoJo Smith before moving on to college coaching. Preston Weigel was ranked 8th in his weight class coming into college, and after a few injury-ridden seasons, he would place 6th and 3rd on the All-American stand in some pretty tough weight classes. The biggest wow though, in my opinion, for the Oklahoma State recruiting class was Jacoby Smith, who was barely ranked in the top 20, actually being ranked 20th in his weight class, which who really knows what that means in the scale of top 100, and he ended up an All-American during one of his starting seasons. However, Derek White, who was an Oklahoma State Classic man, actually came into college from Nebraska before transferring to Oklahoma State, being a national finalist at heavyweight during his final season. Speaking of Nebraska, they were actually the 6th ranked team this year, and they might have lost Derek White, but they also had the legend Tyler Berger, who was a 3-time All-American and 1-time finalist for them. He also did a lot of freestyle after his college career at the Penn RTC, but I heard officially he is going into the MMA now, according to a few sources. Cornell rounds off the top 5, and they had a pretty big class of ranked wrestlers. Of their class, 8 were in the top 20, and 5 of them were in the top 8. However, on paper that looks really great for recruiting class rankings, but in total, they only had 2 total All-Americans out of all of those ranked wrestlers. With John J. Chavez being ranked 4th in his weight class coming into high school, being one of their top recruits, he suffered a lot of injuries throughout his career, and the best he ever did was play 7th one year. Brandon Womack was a big upgrade and huge diamond in the rough for them, placing 8th once, but was ranked 17th in his weight class, and he was from Alabama, so kind of cool for them. But besides them having a few low All-Americans, no one else really came all that close to All-American status. Now that we've kind of done the top 5 teams, let's kind of pick and choose some pretty cool key notes from the other top 20 teams. Because once you get out of the top 5, there's of course going to be some drop off, because if you aren't ranked in the top 8 and you don't All-American, I mean, that is technically living up to your standards. But anyway, let's highlight some pretty cool moments from the class of 2014. Kind of another heartbreaking transfer story if you look at it that way. Stanford brought in number 1 ranked Joey McKenna, where he was a one-time All-American for them before transferring to Ohio State and doing most of his All-American honors there. Joey McKenna is also still competing in freestyle, trying to make the 65 kilogram world team. They also had Paul Fox, who was ranked 12th in his weight class and became an All-American and a round of 12 guy, going on some pretty impressive runs compared to his seat at the tournament. Another thing that's really interesting when you look back at these recruiting class rankings, you kind of see why Oklahoma started to fall off a little bit. Because of the 6 top 20 guys they brought in, only one of them was in the top 5, and only 2 were in the top 10. With all that said, only one of them All-American in Ryan Milhoff, but he would eventually transfer to Arizona State. And then besides that, most of them started, but not much after that when it comes to the national tournament. I was actually pretty high on these rankings, and by high I mean not very good. Their best wrestler coming in on paper was Sam Stoll, who was ranked 3rd in his weight class. He was a one-time All-American for them, and I'm not too sure what he's up to now. They also had Seth Gross, but he would soon transfer to South Dakota State, where he was pretty incredible for them, winning a national title there. And now he's still competing on the senior stage, and he recently made a 61 kilogram world team back in 2022. Minnesota had some pretty cool recruits coming in, like Ethan Lezak, who was ranked 7th after a pretty weird senior year in high school, but he soon returned to form in college, placing 2nd, 4th, and 7th during his times at 125 and 133. Virginia Tech had a pretty small class of ranked wrestlers, but they got some heavy hitters. They had Zach Zavatsky, who was ranked 3rd in his weight class, and he was a 2-time All-American, along with Solomon Chisco, who was also a 2-time All-American. They actually both helped Virginia Tech get their first and only team trophy to date. However, to talk about another number 1 that didn't pan out was a great wrestler who went to Virginia, Garrett Peppelman, who had a winning season during one of his starts at Virginia, but there was just a lot of ups and downs throughout his career, and he never really came close to being an All-American. Chip Ness for North Carolina was ranked 3rd in his weight, but became a classic upset kid at NCAAs, not being seeded All-American twice and leaving his career as a 2-time All-American and 1-time national semifinalist. Now with some of those storylines out of the way from the 2014 class, I think it's time to talk about some of the biggest possible upgrades you can recruit. Unranked wrestlers that found their way onto the All-American stand. I think Michigan might have had one of the biggest named unranked wrestlers that is still competing to this day, and that is Alex Pantaleo, who was seriously unranked coming into college and became a 3-time All-American with his highest finish being 3rd. As of today, he still competes on the senior landscape for freestyle, with his best weight being 70 kilograms, still in the hunt to make a team. NC State had some great unranked recruiting stories this year. Kevin Jack came in and honestly came out of nowhere to become a 3-time All-American, with his highest finish being 3rd. However, they also brought in the Wyoming star Bryce Meredith, who went on some incredible runs after he left NC State. He returned to Wyoming to become a 3-time All-American and 2-time national finalist for them. The craziest part of that is that he would come back to beat Kevin Jack on some massive All-American runs. Sean Foss was also unranked and was never an All-American, but he made the round of 12 a few times and was naturally ranked All-American a few times as well. So for sure an impact guy for them. Then to wrap it all up, I gotta talk about one of my favorite teams in Lehigh, who brought in Scotty Parker, a PA stud, but was still unranked, and he would end up a 2-time All-American in some pretty tough weight classes at 133. Alright everybody, I honestly think that's a wrap. And to be honest, I know I probably missed so many wrestlers from the class of 2014 that had an impact on their team in different ways, or some guys who didn't have an impact that should have. But I'll tell you all this much: this video was just a blast to research and obviously create. I love videos where we can all just do a deep dive together and learn some wrestling along the way. As always, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe, along with leaving a comment on some of the 2014 wrestlers that I failed to mention. Now, with all that said, I hope you all have a great day. Take care, everybody.